The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, is looking to fire departments to comment on proposed changes to emergency response standards. Madison Porter talked to a volunteer-based fire chief who would alter those proposals because of the cost.
That's right, Lizzie. And on top of the cost, Logan Trevoli's fire chief, Dave Tuttle, says he thinks it will make it even harder to attract and retain volunteer firefighters. Tuttle says because commuting for work is more common, there's a lack of affordable housing, recruitment is a nationwide problem. 40 people in western Peoria County voluntarily respond to fires and medical calls 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with little pay. Logan Trevoli's annual budget is around $450,000 with little to spare other than things like equipment and apparatus. OSHA's proposed changes would increase the amount of training, medical screenings, and documentations.
Even if they have 25 or 30 years on the job, to do additional training in certain areas, and would also be required to do additional evaluations. So it would affect not only new volunteer firefighters, but also firefighters that have been with us for 15, 20, 30 years.
Tuttle says the original rules are about 40 years old and they could definitely use some updates, but he'd rather see the changes come in a more moderate fashion than all at once.
Don't get me wrong, training and safety is our #1 paramount concern, and we actually, want to continue to improve in those areas, just like every volunteer fire service. But the OSHA requirements are a little bit far-reaching in some areas.
While taxes are the most common source of funding for fire departments, fire protection districts are not part of a municipality and therefore cannot increase taxes to cover the cost of the additional training, which Tuttle says will be around $15,000. The deadline for fire departments to comment on the proposal is next Monday. As for a public hearing following that, OSHA has not set a date.